I love Cheryl's story as a reminder that the things we learn to do and learn to love as a child can impact us all the way through our lives. That Cheryl's love for music that began when her mom encouraged her leads her to sing in our chapel worship choir even today. And in all the ways that we serve, in all the things that we do, we find that we often learn them when we're young. And there's maybe not a better time to think about how we're impacting the people around us with the example we're setting than a day like today, a day like Father's Day. It's good to see you this morning. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here at the Summit, and today we are continuing our series called 5 Things God Uses. Now, these 5 things God uses are things that have been identified that can be an impetus to help us take a step in our spiritual journey. And each of these 5 things that God uses connect back to the 5 practices that we're thinking about this year as a church. Now, if you've been around the Summit for a while, if you've been here sometime since January, you've probably heard us talk about these 5 practices because this year we're focusing on what it looks like for us to take steps in our spiritual journey. And we do that through praying, growing, giving, serving, and inviting. But those aren't just things you do. Sometimes they are moments that move you forward. And so over the next several weeks, we're going to continue in this series thinking about these 5 things that God uses. And we began in week 1 by thinking about practical teaching. For years, for generations, that has been the focus of the church. You gather together and you hear teaching and hopefully you learn something, but that's not the end goal. Did you know that? I hope you learned something today, but the goal today is not simply that you know something new when you walk out the door. The goal is much more significant than that. The goal is that you do something with it. Remember, in part 1, we said that application is everything. Knowing it and doing it are 2 different things. And when knowing leads to doing, that's when practical teaching really takes root. And that's when, to our 5 practices, you are growing. Last week in part 2, our pastor emeritus, Jim Preissig, was here with a special message for us. And he shared with us about the second thing God uses, and that's providential relationships. The relationships we find ourselves in can help us be propelled forward in our faith journey. And Pastor Jim unpacked the story of the prodigal son, a story that was familiar to some in the room, and helped us think about it through the lens of a first century hearer. The invitation of the father to the son to come back into the fold was so shocking because in Jesus' time, one would have expected the father to hold it against his son, to have a grudge against his son, instead of simply to welcome and forgive. And we were reminded last week of one of our practices, the practice of inviting others into God's story to be a part of what God is doing. And this week is part 3, and we're looking at the third thing God uses, and what we're looking at today is personal ministry. Personal ministry is where our gifts and our skill set meet a need somewhere around us, and it helps us to make an impact in people's lives around us. And that lines up with our practice of serving. Today, we're going to find ourselves in 1 Peter. If you have your Bible, you can open it up there, 1 Peter. You can Google it. I'll be in the New Living Translation. You can look it up in the Bible app, whatever you want to do. But let's just kind of give ourselves a reminder of what's happening here in the book of 1 Peter. The book of 1 Peter is written by this guy. His name is, we've been here before. We've had this conversation together before. We did a whole series on this book. So the book of 1 Peter is written by this guy. His name is? All right, you're good now. We're ready to go. The book of 1 Peter is written by Peter, and Peter's letter is written to a group of churches. Now, this is different than many of the scriptures that you will find in the New Testament. A lot of times, the letters are written to specific churches dealing with specific problems at specific places, and they're addressing things that particular group of people needs to hear. But the book of 1 Peter is just a little bit more general in its approach. It's a little more broad in its approach. And the book of 1 Peter is written to all the churches who are scattered around the area. Now the question might become, well, why did these churches all end up scattered? And the reason is that they were being persecuted by the culture that they were living in. Their beliefs and their allegiances were different from the culture, and they felt the pressure, and the only way out was to escape. And escape they did. They went and they formed little pockets of Christian churches, little pockets of believers. And this letter is meant to be an encouragement to them about what it looks like to live your faith in this situation. And so today, the words that we read from Peter are a mandate to those of you who call yourself a Christian. If you walked in today and you say, I believe in Jesus and I'm following Jesus, what you're about to hear is not what I think you should do. These are the words of Scripture telling us what to do. And perhaps you walked in today and you're not sure about the faith thing and you're exploring the faith thing, or maybe you're not interested in the faith thing. These principles that you will hear today, I believe, will help you be more winsome in conversation and will make you a more delightful person to be around if you begin to live them out. We're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 4, and I'm going to start in verse 7. Peter writes, "The end of the world is coming soon." Now, I'm going to pause there, but I'm not going to pause for too long, because there are lots of crazy people who think they know when the world is going to end, okay? I realize this, and that's not at all what Peter is doing here. He's not putting a time on it and saying things are going to wrap up here. What Peter is saying is he's saying that at some point, this kingdom that Jesus promised us would come to earth is going to happen. He's expressing his belief that at some point, that this rule of Jesus, this reign of Jesus, the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, is going to take place as Jesus said it would. And guess what? They wanted it to come soon because life was hard. They were up against it. They were persecuted. They were scattered. They weren't with their communities. And so they wanted nothing more than for this situation to end. And it's in this context that Peter is writing. And he continues, "Therefore, be earnest and disciplined in your prayers." Now, I don't know about you, but when things are not going great for me, I can sometimes dwell on the thing that is not great. Have you ever been there? You've got a stressful situation, you have a hurtful situation, you have a difficult conversation, and your mind gets so focused on that thing that it's all you can think about at the expense of everything else in your life. You know, Peter says, I see you, I know you. And when life is pressing in and when things get hard, here's Peter's word, be earnest and disciplined in your prayers. What is Peter saying? Stay focused on the right thing. Keep your heart and your mind focused on who God is and what God is doing. Take your attention off of yourself and your problems and put it on something greater, the plan that God might have for you. And here's where it gets really good, verse 8. Most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins. Today, I'm going to share with you 3 things that you can do to live with other people in mind. And the first thing that you can do is you can put up with others. Now, I know that's not this deep spiritual idea, and I know that it's not the most positive thing that you're going to hear when you walk in the doors of a church, but I'm just trying to be really honest about sometimes the best we can do is to put up with other people. When someone is offensive or rude or obnoxious, sometimes the very best you can do is to put up with them. When people harm you and cross you and offend you, sometimes the very best you can do is to claim this promise that Peter gives us, that love covers a multitude of sins. And so we push back against what culture tells us to do. A culture that tells us that if we disagree, we're being hateful or harmful in some way. And instead we say, you know, when I disagree, I'm going to allow love to cover a multitude of sins. When I don't feel like I'm being treated fairly, I'm going to allow love to cover a multitude of sins. I'm pushing back against cancel culture. And instead, I'm choosing to stay in the relationship and see it through. It's a lighthearted example, but it's appropriate for today because it's Father's Day. Sometimes the best thing we can do is to put up with our fathers. Because they do things like this. They dress like a meme. They show up in their polo and their white socks and their white shoes and their cargo shorts that fit all of their things, right? And sometimes we just have to roll our eyes and put up with our fathers. Or maybe it's not the way they look, but the things they say. Because every time it rains, they all say the same thing, don't they? We really needed that. It's so true. And sometimes the best we can do is to put up with others. But Peter tells us, really, that's not the goal, right? That's the beginning point. That's when it's really bad and I'm really not connected with them and I still have a ways to grow, I'm putting up with them. But there's a step we can take further than that. He continues writing in verse 9. Cheerfully share your home with those who need a meal or a place to stay. Peter's giving us just a little bit more instruction about what it looks like to have a relationship that's others-focused. And he's saying this, the second way we can live with others in mind is to care for others. Another word for this, or kind of the big word, the umbrella that falls under is the word hospitality. To express hospitality to the people around you. And I know that sometimes we think of the word hospitality and we think about, getting out our china and folding the napkins and all that. That's not at all what hospitality actually means. Hospitality is about seeing a need and meeting the need. You may remember that around the year 250, there was this famine and this plague and this flood and this drought, and people were dropping like flies. And the bishop in North Africa said, it feels like the end of the world is coming soon. And at the height of this disaster, 5,000 people were dying each day in the streets of Rome. The city smelled of death. And the only thing that kept the plague from wiping out the city entirely was this little group of Christians, this church of Jesus that was seeing needs and meeting needs. They were caring for their own, and they were caring for those who were outside of their sphere of influence, those who didn't believe like them. And they single-handedly made an impact on their trajectory of the illness. And they made a name for themselves as Christians who were hospitable, who cared for others. It's exactly what Paul had in mind when he wrote in Romans chapter 12. Always be eager to practice hospitality. It's almost like Paul knew what we were thinking when we say, oh, but I'm not good at being hospitable. Yeah, that's why Paul said to practice it. Because when you're not good at something, how do you get better? You practice it. He can sense our objection, and he just wants us to do it. Because caring for others is important, whether it's your top spiritual gift or not. Engaging in this way is crucial for our own growth and to meet the needs of people around us. And if you're someone who came today and you're like, I'm not even sure about the whole faith thing, putting the needs of others before your own and living them out is a principle that you can enact today. And in doing so, you're beginning to live like Jesus. I know it's Father's Day today, and I saw the pancakes out there. Haven't had one yet. And I saw the coffee. If you're new around the summit, we'd love to buy you some coffee. I haven't had coffee yet. But I do want to take just a moment on this Father's Day to say a word to fathers. I just want to say this. I know you, and I see you. I know that dads sometimes get a bad rap. I know that sometimes you're affiliated with the goober from the sitcom who can't make a coherent decision. And I know that the stereotypes that you hear about, that men only care about one thing, and you're willing to sacrifice your family for the career, that you don't change diapers, and you can't cook anything but a TV dinner, and that you couldn't find your keys if they were sewn to your head, or whatever that is. But I know you've heard all of that stuff before, but I also want to say this. I know you. And I know so many of you that love your family deeply. You're working to set an example of what it looks like to follow Jesus for your family by living it out personally. I see you. In your relationship with Jesus, it's becoming real and it's becoming apparent. And for many of you, you're working it out by trial and error because you didn't have that example growing up. And yet, you're so committed to it that you're doing it. So my message for the guys in the room today is this: keep on keeping on. Don't give up. Don't let the message of culture about who men are and what men should be wear you out. Don't be discouraged from doing what is good. Men and the rest of us care for others. And here's why it matters. Verse 10. God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them to serve one another. The final way that we can live with others in mind is simply to serve others. You see the progression, right? Put up with others, take care of others, serve others. It gets more difficult the further you go down the road. But there's something for everyone at every stage. Perhaps there are different people in your life that fall in different places on this scale in your own life. And ultimately, it leads us here. We want to be people who are serving those around us. Now, here's what I know about you. You love to serve. You want to make a difference in the world. And I know that because I watch it. I see you serve in our church. I see you serve in the community. Lifeway Research did a study recently. And the study showed that 84% of people who are average church attenders said they had a desire to serve other people. Now, first of all, it's troubling that it's only 84%. But secondly, it would be significantly higher than that at this church. I have no doubt about that. Because you love to meet the needs of other people. Now, here's where this study gets even a little bit more off the rails. 84% of the people said they want to serve, and 33% of them actually have. So my question is, what about you? Where are you serving? We know that one of the 5 practices that we can use to grow is by serving. And we know that having a personal ministry is one of the 5 things that God uses. So what does that look like for us? Let me give you a few examples today. You could be a part of our Difference Makers community group, a group of men and women who are meeting needs in our church family and in the community. They rake yards, they pick up leaves, they put together furniture, they move things to our mission partners. They help in all kinds of ways. Anywhere that they can make a difference, that's where you will find them. You can make a difference at student camp and in student ministry ongoing. Last week we shared the story with you of Luke and Blake, 2 guys who came and saw what God was doing in our student ministry and jumped in. We need more Lukes and Blakes who are going to be involved in what God is doing on an ongoing basis in the lives of our students. And hey, I know that many of you are dads who once upon a time had a camcorder, right? Did you have one like this? Aren't those great? If you ever looked like this, we have a spot for you to serve. It's on our production team. You see the cameras around the room. There's a place for you to be involved. You can serve. You can start a group You can mentor, hold people accountable, have prayer, meet for community, gather in your home. There are all kinds of ways that you can serve. You can be on our welcome team. Cheryl, who was in our video that talked about singing in the chapel choir, also today is out in the lobby welcoming people. Maybe dishing up pancakes this morning as well. There are all kinds of ways. Or maybe you're just looking for a place that you can jump in and make an immediate difference. You could be a part of our mobile food distribution, joining our Ford truck to go and give groceries to people in need. Or perhaps you were one of the people who delivered more than 1,300 items to our food pantry to distribute at our next food distribution that's coming up. But for Father's Day, this is maybe my favorite example of all. This is my friend Lance. Do we have Lance? Lance is is that your right or left? That is your right. That is Lance on the right. And Lance is an extremely talented, gifted guy. And he could serve at our church in all kinds of ways. But do you know what Lance does? He's our student ministry grill master. If there is something that needs food in student ministry, Lance is the guy. That's his wife, Tracy, in the middle, serving up the hot dogs that he grilled, and you can see kids enjoying them on the other side. There is somewhere for you to serve. This year, we've had over 70 new people step into a place of service, and I want to invite you to join that number today. And why does that matter? It matters because there's someone watching the way you're living your life. Just before we had kids, a song came out that I didn't know how meaningful or true it would be until our kids actually grew up a little bit. It's a country song, and it tells the story of a dad driving down the road and hitting the brakes, and the fries fly, and the kid says a 4-letter word. Some of you can relate. And the dad is reflecting on this moment with his son, and here's the chorus of this song. He said, "I've been watching you, Dad. Ain't that cool? I'm your buckaroo. I want to be like you and eat all my food and grow as tall as you are. We got cowboy boots and camo pants. Yeah, we're just alike, ain't we, Dad? I want to do everything you do, so I've been watching you." I didn't know how true this would be as a dad until I became one. And there was this moment that it really became so real, it was impossible to deny for me. It was a time in my life when I was dressing up to go to work, and I was wearing these fancy black dress shoes. And Camden became obsessed with wearing dress shoes as well, and we couldn't figure out why. Until one day he walked in the kitchen and he placed his shoes next to my shoes. And he said, "Look, Dad, same as you." And I thought, everything I do, he's watching. And it's true as a parent, it's true as a dad on this Father's Day. But it's true in your faith life as well, as you live your faith out in the world. So why does a personal ministry matter? Why does serving matter? Because the way you live sets an example for the people around you. So, where are you serving? Because when you serve, it makes a difference that echoes in eternity.